2 decades. That is how long we have accepted the official story. A quartet. A cheerful yellow home perched on a grassy hill. A universe built around splashing in puddles, visiting Grandpa Pig's garden, and 2 perfectly ordinary children who have perfectly ordinary adventures every single day. But what if that comfortable story was constructed to keep us from asking the right questions? What if the number of children inside that house is not 2 or 3, but 5? 5 kids sharing one roof. 2 of them front and center, beloved, branded, globally recognized, and the remaining 3 deliberately erased, tucked away behind sealed rooms and family silence and a 20-year campaign to make sure nobody ever noticed they existed. We noticed. We have spent time going through the episodes frame by frame, cross-referencing timelines, and connecting details that the show scattered across years of content hoping nobody would piece together. A name on a screen that should not be there. A face pressed against glass in a photo that was never meant to be studied. A piece of furniture with no logical purpose unless something is being concealed behind it. Everything connects. And today we are laying it all out. By the time this video ends, that cheerful yellow house is going to look very different to you. The first missing child. There is a sibling who predates Peppa. A child who existed before the muddy puddles, before the playgroup, before any of this became a global phenomenon. Most people watching this show right now have no idea he was ever part of the picture. We are calling him Oscar. His first trace shows up in one of the most overlooked moments in the entire series. During a scene where Peppa and George sit down at the family computer to play a game, the screen briefly shows a leaderboard. It is on camera long enough to read. The entries that correspond to known family members are easy enough to decode. Initials that match up cleanly with the characters we recognize. Then there is the entry that does not match anyone. 2 letters sitting quietly at the bottom of that list, attached to a score that someone had to earn by actually sitting at that machine and playing. OP. Nobody named OP lives in that house. Nobody with those initials visits regularly enough to have a saved score on a private family computer. The only explanation that holds up is that this score belongs to someone who used to live there. Someone whose presence was scrubbed from the official record, but whose digital footprint survived. The second trace is architectural. That house has an upper level, not a bedroom floor. Something above that, a storage space, a loft, a room above the rooms. It appears occasionally in the background of certain scenes, always packed tightly with boxes and objects, always framed in a way that discourages closer inspection. The family never ventures up there. In an episode where the electricity cuts out completely, the logical move would be to check the upper-level junction box. Instead, the adults sit perfectly still in the dark and wait. They do not go upstairs. They do not even suggest it. That is not laziness. That is avoidance. Something about that upper room makes the adults in this family unwilling to approach it. And then there is the timeline problem that unravels the whole official story. An episode exists in which young Peppa watches old home footage of herself as a newborn. In the background of that footage, her mother is visibly expecting another child. On the surface, that seems straightforward, except that child cannot be George. The spacing between Peppa and George's ages does not line up with what the footage shows. The arithmetic only resolves cleanly if a third child arrived between them, a child who was present briefly and then disappeared from every photo, every episode, every official family portrait. George carries a particular dinosaur toy with an intensity that goes beyond ordinary childhood attachment. He treats it less like a plaything and more like something precious that must be protected. The most logical explanation nobody has considered. It was not purchased for George. It was passed down to him from the child who came before. The face in the window. Oscar is the hidden child from before the story began, but the next missing sibling was captured in the middle of it, frozen in an official image, and then, quietly, never referenced again. At some point during the show's run, a piece of promotional material was released through official channels. It depicted the recognized family members posed cheerfully outside their home. Standard publicity material, completely unremarkable at first glance. Except that in one of the ground floor windows visible in the background, there is a small face, pink, piglet-shaped, watching the family celebrate outside from an interior room separated from everyone by a pane of glass. That face matches Peppa's exactly. The fan. Community spent considerable time analyzing the image. Various names were proposed. Alternate versions of familiar ones, slightly shifted as if whoever this character was had been given something close to a real name, but not quite. The image was not retracted or corrected. It simply stopped being discussed. The way things stop being discussed, when drawing attention to them, creates more problems than staying quiet does. Then the old house came down. In the renovation storyline, the original building is demolished and an entirely new structure rises in its place. Here is the critical detail. The location does not change. The new construction sits directly over the same ground as the original. Whatever was inside the walls of the old building did not get relocated when the bulldozers arrived. The foundation stayed, and anything beneath it stayed too. The new bedroom given to Peppa in the rebuilt house contains a set of bunk beds. George received his own separate room in the new layout, which means Peppa is the sole occupant of her space. One child, one room, two beds. The lower bunk is hidden behind a heavy floor-length curtain. There is no decorative reason for that curtain. Children's television does not include unexplained set dressing. Every visible object in an animated room was placed there by a deliberate creative decision. That curtain exists because something behind it requires concealment. The lower bunk is not spare furniture. It is occupied space that the camera is not permitted to show directly. Her space, her curtain, her 20-year secret, built right into the architecture of the new house. The new arrival who changes everything. Now a third child has entered the picture through the front door. Welcomed, announced, celebrated at a scale the show has never attempted before. The newest member of the family arrived with her own theatrical release, her own dedicated merchandise line, and something that had not happened in 2 full decades of broadcasting: a rewritten opening sequence. The words Peppa has spoken at the start of every episode since the beginning have been changed.
This is my little brother George.
A new name sits where only George's used to be. Consider what that rewrite means to the ones who never got an opening sequence at all. This newest child receives the dedicated bedroom, the developmental milestones shown on camera, the narrative attention, the commercial partnerships. Everything that 2 other children were apparently denied. She is not an addition to the family. She is the publicly acceptable version of what the family always should have been. A third child presented cleanly, without the complications that came with the previous ones. Even the child who had always been the youngest is now repositioned, moved sideways. No longer the smallest or the most recent, eased toward the middle of a lineup that officially still only has 3 members, while unofficially, the count sits at 5. The architecture of concealment. Rebuilt house should not be as large as it is. The construction crew responsible for it is not known for excess. The previous structure was adequate for the family's apparent size. The replacement is significantly bigger. More rooms, more floors, more spaces that the camera visits briefly and then retreats from without fully showing. The upper level room reappears, now larger, still sealed. A new computer workspace has been added, raising the question of whether that leaderboard with its unexplained initials will eventually surface again. This building was not designed around the family the world recognizes. It was designed around a larger group, one portion living openly in the lit and furnished rooms, another portion existing in the sealed and curtained and never quite shown spaces that no official tour of the house ever seems to reach. 2 separate households under a single roof, the recognized and the hidden. 5 children, a single address, a story constructed carefully, enough to survive 20 years of viewers watching without ever quite seeing. The leaderboard entry that has no owner, the face behind the glass that was never explained, the curtain across the lower bunk, the upper room nobody enters, the timeline that only resolves if you add a child who officially does not exist. None of it is coincidence. All of it is architecture. A structure built to keep certain members of this family invisible for as long as possible. The question worth sitting with is not whether these children exist. It is what the family is protecting by keeping them hidden, and whether, whatever that reason is, it is still enough to hold the secret together, because the cracks are showing. Tell us what you think is really happening in that house. Every theory welcome. We read them all. Subscribe if you want to keep pulling at the threads.